Hi, everybody. Stephen Rosell here, product manager on the My team, also working on collections and the various products as part of the collection. Today, I want to give you a quick overview of the recent release of my BonusTools for version 2020. So if you go to the Autodesk App Store, which is apps.autodesk.com, there's a My section, and if you go in there, there's a BonusTools installer. It says for version 2017 to 2020. This will install BonusTools for each of those versions. However, the new tools are actually only available for the most recent versions, actually both Maya 2019 and Maya 2020. So all these new tools that you see here and all these updated tools that you see here are available for both of those versions. So for 2017 and 2018, you'll still get the older version unless you upgrade. But at any rate, I want to go over the various tools that we've added. Quite a bit has been done. If you open up the help doc when you first install it, you'll get an overview of what BonusTools is if you're not familiar with it. I assume most of you are familiar with it by now. If you scroll down a bit, there'll be notes on all of the new features. Again, there have been a number of updated features. If you scroll down to the documentation, basically anything that's new or updated is indicated in the outline here. So for instance, we have a new tool that allows you to stack align objects. So you click on that, it'll take you to the documentation where it explains what stack align objects will do. So I'm going to switch over to Maya now, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the new features. So let's go over a few different things. I'm going to create just a simple object here to work with, and we'll just go kind of one by one and step through the different changes. So one of the things that's been updated is the ability to create a locator at a custom pivot axis. So what that means is you can basically take an object and we can, let's say, position it kind of arbitrarily here in space, and then we can grab, let's say, the face here. And you can see that that manipulator is aligned to the object space. So if I say create at custom pivot axis, it's going to create a locator that matches that orientation of that pivot. But it can customize this. So I technically could come in here and I could grab that pivot, I could put it way off here, and I could rotate it into some kind of arbitrary orientation. And now when I say create locator, it's going to create a locator at that axis. So we have a similar tool that will do that with a joint, but they're in separate sections. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So there are a lot of tools under the modify section. I'm just going to tear this off just so I can show it. The modify section is mostly made up of transformation tools. So these are tools that allow you to move, rotate, or orient your objects in these different kind of automated ways. But to show the new ones, I am going to just create a few simple objects. I'll pause and be right back. So the first one we'll show is proportional placement tool. What this does is it allows you to place your objects relative to one another. So, right now I can move these objects around, but if I do something like a scale, it's going to obviously add scale to each one of them, so I don't really want that. If I wanted to scale their offset, though, as opposed to actually scaling the vertices, I can use this proportional placement tool. So what this will do is you select objects, and then it will create a universal manipulator that will be kind of a boundary for those objects. And then I can take the corners of these and I can proportionally offset and place these. So I can basically, squeeze the gap, tighten the gap between them in different directions. And then you can also use these interior manipulators to do things like positioning, but also things like rotation. It's a little hard to get to there, but I can rotate that. And then I can go in here and I can still kind of reposition and kind of orient these. And it works vertically as well. Right now, these are all on the same plane. And then what it's doing is it's using a series of constraints under the hood. So as soon as I basically quit out of this tool, then it will remove that. You can see it deleted the manipulator. So that's gone now from the scene. And if I look at the outliner, everything is nice and clean. So that's one of the tools. We also have this tool called Stack Align Objects. Stack Align Objects does exactly that. It gives you a simple little UI that allows you to take a bunch of objects and stack them in different ways. So I can take one object, another, and another, and I can say stack above on Y, and it will stack in the order that I've chosen. So now if I add another one here and I say stack above, each one of those will get stacked above that object. Likewise, I could do stack below, and it will reverse the order, stack above. It uses the order of selection, so if I were to select, let's say, the torus, and let's actually just move this over here. Let's say I wanted to stack that and that and that on top of the torus. Then it's going to stack in the order of the selection. And then it's got align along options as well. So if I undo this a few times, I'll get back to where I was. Let's say I wanted to align all of these along maybe the x-axis. I could take each one of these. I can say align along x, and it's basically just going to take each one of those and use their current positions and align them along the world x-axis. Now likewise, I can say align along z, and it will do exactly that. And it'll target the last selected object. So if I grab this object as the last one and say align along, that will be the target object. And then I can do things like equidistant placement. And then I can align to minimum values as well. So that's a pretty handy tool. Another thing I want to show is offset transforms. Let's just undo a few steps. Get back to where we were there. Back to the beginning. There we go. With offset transforms, what that will do is it will give me a simple little utility that will allow me to do exactly that. It'll allow me to take these transforms and offset them either with translate, rotate, or scale in different ways. So I could take all these and say I want to offset them by 10 units along X, and I can just click, 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 and it will offset them incrementally along those units. You could do world or object axis. Similarly, rotate, I can say I want to rotate these 45 degrees or 5 degrees or whatever it may be along any given axis like so, and it will just incrementally offset those. And then similarly scale, although it uses a percentage, so it doesn't actually use the world values here. It'll allow you to scale based on a percentage. So if I wanted to scale 110% only along the y-axis, I could say scale relative, and it will incrementally scale those 110% each time. If I want these to be, exactly 500%, and I want to scale along these two axes, I didn't actually enter that. There we go. There we go. That's 500%. So you get the basic idea. And then if I wanted to get everything back to the original scale, I can just say scale absolute, and then I can scale to an absolute value, and it's no longer incremental in this case. So it's just a handy little tool for basically quickly applying transform offsets to multiple objects at the same time. So let's go back a few steps. The next one I'll show is randomized transforms. Now we have randomized transforms has been around for a while. This is the advanced version, and it's advanced, but because it's advanced, it's also somewhat complicated to use. It's actually a very powerful tool, but sometimes you just want to do a really quick randomization. So I've got these cubes, and the way it works is you just select the objects you want to randomize, and you can either move, rotate, or scale those. So if I wanted to randomize the scale between 90 and 110%, I can just start randomizing the scale, and as I continue to randomize, they get more and more different every time I click. I can undo that, and I can constrain that to specific axes. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to rotate, and we'll just say I want to do negative 60 all the way up to 60. So you change the number of degrees, and then you start to randomly rotate. And then every time I click, I get a random offset from that. So it's relative to the previous value. And then I can go in and I can, do random scale, and before too long I can get these very different looking cubes. And then I can also do random move. I might not want to do that vertically because that's moving them up and down. I might want to do the random move and switch this to X and Z, and now when I do the random move, you can see it's actually kind of moving randomly along the ground plane. And I can set this obviously to be, a much smaller or rather bigger value, and I'm going to get a wider range of offsets. So now when I do the move, you can see that they really start to look different. And then pretty quickly, I can get this totally randomized set of objects. So very simple to use, but again, more advanced options in the Randomized Transforms Advanced tool. So the bounding box scale tool allows you to essentially use the world space bounding box of an object. So it works on one object at a time. This is actually an old tool, but it's been revamped a bit. For one, you can choose to set the pivot to a minimum value or a maximum value along on either the axes. And then let's say, for instance, I wanted to scale this to a certain size. You could see, let's say I wanted to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. If I scale this, to 6, that's actually not going to be 6 units. because it's relative to its original size. So what I can do is set this to be a min y, and then I can come in here and I want to set this to be absolute 6, and now it's going to set the scale values. And again, you can see here the scale value is actually 3.023, but the size of the object is exactly 6 units tall. So I could go in here and say 7, and now it's exactly 7 units tall. So it allows you to set the world space real world height independently of whatever the actual value is. So moving on, we'll get into the display section. In the display section, there is mainly one change, and that is this option here, enable pop-up help. The reason this is in here is because there's a mysterious issue in Maya where, when you hover over an icon or an attribute or something along those lines, you'll get a little bit of a pop-up here. That, for some reason, can get mysteriously disabled. So what this will do is, if that ever gets disabled, rather than having to go into the preferences, you just simply click on this and it will re-enable that pop-up. I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's custom tools or plugins or what, but there's some mechanism that will disable that unintentionally. So moving on from here, we'll go into the Windows section. We added, or rather updated, the scene annotation tool. There was a bug in this tool causing it to crash. This is an older tool that's been around for a while. The UI is much more flexible too, so we have a scalable width in the UI. And then, if you add more text in here, then it will scale vertically as well. But the idea is I can put my custom notes in here. So I'll say my custom note, and then I can save this with the scene. So if I save and close, and then I save this scene out, so I'll just put this on my desktop, and we'll just call this test, and then reopen that scene. As soon as I reopen that scene, then I'll get the scene annotation. Previously, I had some issues here. When I would delete that, it would crash Maya, so people weren't able to use this tool for the last couple of releases at least. That has been fixed, along with a couple of other miscellaneous fixes. Now, under the modeling section, we have a few improvements. One is we have 2 versions of the Flatten Components tool now. In the past, if I were to grab a series of components, vertices, edges, or faces, and use Flatten Components, then it would give me a manipulator, and this is still the case. I have this option. If I go into object mode, it will align the orientation to the average normal of those vertices. But it does give you a manipulator, and if I delete that, it's essentially a deformer. If I delete that, it removes the history. So now what I can do is just grab some components and just use the basic option. So there's an advanced and a basic. The basic will just do one simple flatten, and then you'll be done. You won't have any additional history on the object. So let me give you another example of how this can be useful. So I'm going to just simply create a sphere, and then we'll maybe just scale that up a little bit and kind of rotate it around, and we can just put it off into space, just say that this is some object that we're working on. And what I'll do is I'll just grab the end point of this and then just use my grow selection here just to expand that out. And to flatten this using traditional tools would be very cumbersome. Here I just basically say flatten components, and it will find the average orientation and the average normal of all those vertices, and you can see it will set the manipulator accordingly. So you can do this on things like face paths as well. So if I grab, say for instance, this face path here and do a flatten component, you can see that that flattens along that face path. And you can do multiple face paths as well. So let's say I go in here and I do something like a grow selection, and actually I'll set that to faces instead. And I'll do a flatten component, and then just really quickly it will flatten that out and give me kind of this mechanical look. Now obviously I might need to harden edges, but it's as simple as using the marking menus as well. So let's say for instance I were to go in and grab this face path here. Instead of using the tools menu, instead of using the bonus tools menu, this is actually in the shift right click menu. So if I come down here into bonus tools and flatten faces, it will automatically just flatten those faces along the average normal. And you can end up with, again, these kind of nice mechanical shapes that would be hard to accomplish otherwise, or at least tedious. The manipulator that I was talking about is available through the advanced tool, and that has been improved. the visibility and just the general look and feel of that is improved. So it's not technically new, but it is an improved tool. We also made a couple of minor updates to the ribbon and tube tools. So these are the tools that allow you to create a ribbon and a tube mesh. And let me just switch over my lighting here. But now you can basically go in and control the width to a finer degree. So if I set the width, previously that would cap out at about 0.1, so you could create, small tubes and strips. But oftentimes you want to go much smaller than that, so we've enhanced the precision setting. So you can go to a much narrower, skinnier tube than you could before. On the UV editing front, we've made a few different changes. For one, the auto unwrap tool had a number of bugs that have been fixed. You can check the docs regarding that, but this is just a more robust version of that tool that was very popular. The Align UVs tool has been rewritten. The UI is different, and it also allows you to work with multiple shells. So the idea here is you can grab either faces or edges or verts, doesn't really matter, and you can align those along a given axis. So I can align them along the right axis or the left. I can select an additional shell and once again align that. So I can basically take all these and align them along the bottom left direction. For rigging, we've made a number of improvements. One is the Create Circle Control tool, which will basically give you a UI that will allow you to create a circle that can drive a transform, or in this case, a joint. And it will automatically either create the shape and parent it under those joints. So for instance here, if I go Shape under Transform and apply that, it will basically create the shape as a child of that joint, allowing you essentially to go in and directly select that. So now I can just use the curve as a way of quickly going in and selecting it. So it's not creating any extra transform nodes, it's simply creating a shape under that transform. If I go back a couple of steps, I've got a few different controls for this. For one, I can go in, I can change the color. I can also go in and I can change the size to make this larger or smaller. Now, in addition to using the shape under the transform, which simply puts the shape node under the joint node, I can also use a parent constraint option. And I'll set this up as a parent constraint. And I get the same behavior, so I can still select and drive those joints, except that now I'm actually doing this with a series of curves that are essentially parent constraints to those joints. So this is more of an indirect connection. One thing to point out is to automatically use this control nodes with this so that I can bypass Maya's hierarchy. And if I use my up and down arrows, it will actually step up and down the curves. So it doesn't actually select the parents in this case, because these nodes themselves have been defined as control nodes. You can see that this is the control curve, and then this is the tag that automatically gets associated with that. So this allows you to automatically control visibility. It allows you to custom control pick walk. It also allows you to do pre-selection visibility as well. So in other words, if I were to go in and grab this control object, I can set this to be show on mouse proximity, and now that's going to disappear, and I can hover over that in order to visualize it and then in turn select it. So all that control node functionality is automated through this tool, and that's only applicable under the parent constraint option. Now, similar to before with the locator option, I have a create joint at custom pivot axis. This basically means I can align this to that face like so, and then I can create a joint at that pivot axis, and then I could use this joint to bind that particular object or that particular area of the object. So it's just a quick way of aligning your joints to a given piece of your mesh. The Nudge Vert Weights tool is actually a tool that's been around for a while, but it was missing from the last 2 or 3 versions of BonusTools. So this has been reintroduced, and therefore it's been tagged as a new tool. But the idea here is you can grab a joint and then you can shift select one or more vertices, and you can basically increase or decrease based on the nudge value the weight for that particular joint. So I can increase or decrease And I can do this on multiple vertices at the same time. So I can grab several vertices and increase the weight for those vertices or decrease the weight for those vertices for that particular joint simultaneously. This next little utility allows you to profile a single frame in your scene. So you can see this scene has a character animation in it. And traditionally, I'd have to open the profiler and then basically set some parameters before running the profile. Here, I can just say profile one frame. It'll take the current frame and it will profile that frame and then just automatically open the profiler just to give you the diagnostics information for that particular frame that you're on. For rendering, we've made a couple of improvements. One is clean up mental ray nodes. So as you all know, mental ray was retired a while ago, and if we were to open up a scene that contains mental ray nodes, you'll see this error message, which basically lets you know that there are mental ray nodes in here, even though we don't have the mental ray plugin loaded. Now you can say do not show at this time, but what that means is those nodes will be stored forever in that scene. So what I can do now is once this scene opens up, then I can just simply run the clean up mental ray nodes, and it will give me a confirmation notice. And if I say yes, then it will delete all of the associated mental ray nodes. This next tool has been around for a couple of releases, but we have updated it so that it works now with Arnold standard surface shaders. So traditionally it would create just a simple Lambert. Now if you turn on the Arnold standard surface shader option along with randomized color and select these and apply, it will apply a new material to each one of these. What this would allow me to do is go in now and change the color of one of these independently of the rest. So if you have 100 objects, you'll get 100 unique shaders that you can then continue to work with. And one final thing to point out, for those of you that have used Layout Tools in the past, Layout Tools is a visual browser that allows you to create icons for the scenes in your projects. And there were some bugs that resulted in some changes to Qt, or that were resulted from some changes to Qt, that were causing various errors and crashes when changing certain parameters. So for instance, if I were to go to the icon settings and change this from small to medium to large icons, in the past that would actually crash Maya. Again, it's a result of a Qt error or a Qt issue, but it has been rewritten to basically bypass that. So you can change things like the file icon size. You can also change things like resetting settings and a few other things that were causing this inadvertent crash. So not a huge change or update in terms of functionality, but obviously avoiding crashes is important. So we've been able to fix that in this release. All right, that should wrap it up. Thanks again for your time, and good luck with the new version of BonusTools.